Have you ever stopped to wonder why soldiers in 19th century paintings look like brightly colored bowling pins waiting to be knocked down? For generations, we've been fed the same comfortable story about military honor, the beauty of uniforms, and the tactical genius of great commanders. But let's set aside our school textbooks for a moment and apply some basic common sense. Picture yourself standing in an open field. Your enemy holds a weapon capable of killing you from 500 yards away. Would you put on a bright red or snow white coat with golden decorations, stand shoulder to shoulder with your comrades in a tight formation, and slowly march toward the enemy's rifle barrels to the beat of a drum? This sounds like the script for mass suicide, yet this is exactly what historians call the great military art of the 19th century. Something doesn't add up here, does it? By the middle of the 1800s, firearms had made a revolutionary leap forward. The rifled musket appeared, along with the famous mini-A ball, a conical bullet that expanded upon firing, gripped the barrel's rifling, and spun for accuracy. The results were devastating. Effective shooting range jumped from about 70 yards to nearly 1,000. That's not gradual improvement. That's a 15-fold increase in killing distance. A skilled marksman could now pick off enemy officers from distances previously considered safe enough for a Sunday picnic. Common sense would dictate an obvious response. Spread out, take cover, dig trenches, wear camouflage colors that blend with mud and grass. Any farmer hunting deer understands this instinctively. If you want to survive, don't make yourself an easy target. But what happened in reality? The Crimean War, our own Civil War, the Franco-Prussian War, everywhere the same picture. Soldiers in bright, eye-catching uniforms, red, blue, white, continued forming tight columns and boxes. They marched straight into fortified positions bristling with rifled weapons and artillery. Drums beating, flags waving, men falling in rows, cut down by fire they never even saw coming. The official explanation blames this on rigid military thinking. Generals were old men, we're told, raised on Napoleonic tactics, simply unable to adapt to new realities. But think about this for a moment. Military affairs represent the most ruthlessly practical sphere of human activity. If a tactic doesn't work, you abandon it immediately, or you lose the war and everything that comes with it. A general whose army gets slaughtered due to outdated methods doesn't get a second chance. Yet for decades, nothing changed, as if the true purpose wasn't defeating the enemy, but maximizing casualties on both sides. Look at the casualty figures from major battles of that era. Tens of thousands dead in a single day, and most didn't fall in hand-to-hand combat or heroic bayonet charges. They were simply shot down on the approach, like targets in a shooting gallery. Why send infantry across a mile of open ground under crossfire? This makes no sense if your goal is capturing territory, but it makes perfect sense if your goal is reducing the population. Remember the famous charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava? The flower of British aristocracy was sent galloping straight into Russian cannon. 600 horsemen rode into the Valley of Death. Barely a third returned. There was zero military justification. No sane commander would issue such an order if he valued his men's lives. Or consider our own Civil War. Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, 12,000 men walking across open ground toward fortified positions. The result was predictable slaughter. Fredericksburg, wave after wave of Union soldiers sent against an impregnable stone wall. Cold Harbor, 7,000 casualties in under an hour. General Grant himself later wrote that he regretted the assault. These weren't isolated incidents. This was standard practice. And we're supposed to believe it was simply poor judgment? Now let's address a question that should bring the whole official narrative crashing down. Where did the resources come from to equip these gigantic armies? This question gets politely avoided by even the most meticulous military historians, because an honest answer demolishes the house of cards. Try organizing a camping trip for 20 people. You'll quickly appreciate the logistical challenges. Someone forgets the tent. Someone runs out of food. The car gets stuck in mud. Now imagine this. You need to clothe, feed, and arm 500,000 soldiers, then march them on foot across thousands of miles of unpaved roads. Each soldier needs a uniform, boots, a pack, a weapon, ammunition, food for every single day. Multiply that by 500,000. The numbers become astronomical. According to the official version, industry at that time was just getting on its feet. Manual labor predominated. Factories were primitive. Steam engines were rare luxuries. But look at photographs and illustrations of 19th century soldiers. Millions of men dressed in impeccable uniforms of complex design, fine wool cloth, perfect stitching, metal buttons with emblems, leather belts and cartridge boxes, elaborate headgear. These weren't burlap sacks with holes for arms. This was high-quality production requiring an advanced industrial base. Let's do some simple arithmetic. To uniform an army of 500,000 requires millions of yards of quality fabric. Where were the flocks of sheep that produced all that wool? One sheep yields just a few pounds of wool per year. For millions of yards of cloth, you need millions of sheep. Where were the spinning mills and weaving factories of sufficient capacity? Where were the dye works? Those uniforms gleamed with bright colors, red, blue, green. Time-to chemical dyes in industrial quantities weren't yet available, and natural dyes required enormous plantations of indigo or madder. We don't see these plantations in historical records. We don't see the supply chains for raw materials. It's as if these armies materialized from thin air, already fully equipped. The situation with weapons is even more absurd. We're told about craftsmen gunsmiths hand-forging barrels at their anvils. A romantic picture, the master at his forge, sparks flying, hammer striking hot metal. But rifles from the mid-19th century show the highest level of standardization. Parts from one rifle fit another. Interchangeable parts, that's a technological level we officially reached only in the 20th century with Henry Ford's assembly lines. Yet soldiers in the Crimean War and our Civil War held factory precision weapons, millions of them. If we accept official data about metallurgical capacity of that era, producing that much steel would have taken decades. But conflicts erupted suddenly, and there were enough guns for everyone from day one. The conclusion suggests itself: commanders didn't manufacture this equipment. They withdrew it from arsenals left ownerless after some kind of cataclysm. Warehouses of a previous civilization were simply unsealed and distributed to new armies. Take a look at photographs of cities from that era: New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, or European capitals: London, Paris, Moscow. What catches your eye? Impassable muck, liquid mud up to the knee. Paved roads existed only on the main streets of major cities, and even there, not everywhere. Step off the main avenue and you sink to your ankles. And we're assured that through these quagmires moved armies of hundreds of thousands, with artillery parks and supply wagons. Consider the weight of a cannon from that period. Several tons of cast iron and bronze on a wooden carriage. Pulling it on wooden wheels through saturated clay is physically impossible. Wheels sink, axles break, horses flounder, and every horse needs about 20 pounds of fodder daily: oats, hay, water. The supply train for artillery horses alone would need to be longer than the army itself. Then add powder, shot, food for the men, medical supplies, spare equipment. Supplying such masses of people with railroads in their infancy and decent highways non-existent, this belongs to fantasy, not history. Napoleon, we're told, marched to Moscow, covering over 1,000 miles, with an army of 600,000 men, over roads that turned to swamp after the first rain, without canned food, without refrigeration, without motorized transport. Sherman's march to the sea, 300 miles through enemy territory with 60,000 men supposedly living off the land. How many chickens and hogs would that require? The arithmetic doesn't work. Yet these armies maneuvered. They covered thousands of miles. They appeared where nobody expected them. How? The only reasonable explanation: either the transportation network was entirely different from what we're told, and we're seeing the aftermath of its destruction. Those same flooded and buried cities that researchers whisper about, or the scale of events has been inflated by historians to conceal the true picture. Notice the characteristic contrast in old photographs. Soldiers look like aliens against the surrounding landscape. Immaculate uniforms, polished boots, gleaming buttons, and all around them ruins, tilting shacks, a sea of mud. They don't look like defenders of these places. They look like an occupation force that landed on a devastated planet, as if catastrophe had just occurred, and new masters were surveying their inheritance. Now let's look with fresh eyes at documentary evidence of destruction. Open archival panoramas of Richmond and Atlanta after our Civil War. Look at photographs of Sevastopol after the Crimean Campaign. The official version states, these are results of artillery bombardment with cast iron balls and subsequent fires. Cities burned, and here's the result. Any structural engineer would object. What's captured in these images cannot be produced by gunpowder and cast iron. We observe entire city blocks ground to powder, substantial stone buildings reduced to skeletal remains, sticking up like rotten teeth, melted brick, granite that flowed like butter. What temperature is needed to melt brick masonry? Around 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. An ordinary house fire doesn't create such temperatures. Wood burns at 1100 to 1300 degrees. Where did 1800 come from? A cannonball, even an explosive shell, punches a hole, maybe collapses a wall, but it doesn't turn an entire stone city into a lunar landscape. For that effect, you need something else entirely. These photographs eerily resemble footage from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden in 1945. Total destruction. The pattern of damage points to weapons of colossal power that we somehow forgot to mention in our history books. A telling detail, against the background of stone structures demolished down to their foundations, you often see tree trunks standing almost intact, only slightly charred. This is a characteristic signature of a particular type of shock wave that destroys rigid structures while flowing around flexible objects. Cast iron cannonballs don't work this way. They don't select what to destroy and what to spare. Why would conquerors turn a desired prize into ash? The purpose of war is capturing resources and infrastructure. Why destroy what you intend to use? The answer is disturbing in its simplicity. This wasn't a war for territory. This was a war to erase memory. Those magnificent cities with their monumental architecture didn't belong to the attackers, but they belonged to an old world that had to be destroyed along with all evidence of its greatness. The new masters couldn't allow these monuments to the past to survive. They needed to eliminate the very idea that people once lived better, built more grandly, and possessed technologies unavailable to the 19th century. Examine early daguerreotypes of major cities from the mid-19th century. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, London, Paris, Moscow. Grand avenues, monumental buildings, and striking emptiness. We're told that long exposure times couldn't capture moving people. The technology was primitive, exposure took minutes, and anything that moved simply didn't register on the plate. But this explanation is for the uninformed. Long exposure turns a crowd into blurred silhouettes, into a ghostly haze. It doesn't erase people without a trace. If hundreds of people pass along a street during a 10-minute exposure, we'd see a misty blur, semi-transparent figures. But in these photographs, absolutely dead cities, deserted avenues without a single smudge, shuttered windows, closed doors. Where are the millions who supposedly inhabited these capitals? Where are the street vendors, the carriages, the strolling public, the playing children? One gets the impression that these cities emptied out before the armies of newly formed empires ever marched in. Troops came not to conquer, they came to settle empty hives. They were planetary-scale looters, occupying abandoned buildings, raising their flags, inventing street names and construction dates after the fact, rewriting history to suit themselves, declaring themselves rightful heirs to what they simply found ownerless. Where then did the new inhabitants come from? The mid-19th century was an era of strange institutions. Everywhere, like mushrooms after rain, colossal orphanages and foundling homes sprang up. The statistics are staggering. In some cities, the number of parentless children numbered in the tens and hundreds of thousands. London workhouses, New York foundling asylums, institutions across every major city, everywhere the same picture. Thousands upon thousands of children of unknown origin. Where did this horde of orphans come from? Official history mumbles about epidemics and poverty. But even in the darkest medieval times, such a percentage of parentless children was never observed. Plague decimated cities, but surviving relatives took in the orphans. Children were always valuable. Working hands, continuation of the family line, hope for old age. Yet here were entire armies of children being raised by the state in barracks conditions. A hypothesis exists: these orphans became the new humanity. People without roots, without memory of parents raised in barracks, ideal material for any manipulation. They could be taught any version of history. They had no grandmother to tell the truth by the fireside, no grandfather who remembered how things really were. They had only the sergeant and the corporal, only regulations and orders. These foundlings formed the backbone of armies that ground the remnants of the old world through the meat grinders of the Great Wars. There's another puzzle that won't leave researchers alone. Examine old buildings carefully. Enormous doors 15 feet high, giant steps uncomfortable for modern people to climb, ceilings 17 or 18 feet high, even in ordinary residential buildings, door handles at face level for an adult. Windows starting so high you can't look out without a stepladder. For whom was this built? For soldiers 5'3", dying by thousands at Antietam and Fredericksburg? Obviously not. These structures were designed for a different race, people of different height and physical capabilities. We wander through these halls like children in a giant's house, like dwarfs in the land of titans. The wars of the 19th century were conflicts of little people amid the ruins of vanished giants. The new occupants took over the palaces but couldn't heat them, so they crammed in crude pot-bellied stoves, running stovepipes right out through the windows, disfiguring magnificent facades. They couldn't use the technologies of previous owners, so they tore unknown constructions from the walls, which we today mistake for decorative molding or ornamental elements. Copper and bronze parts got melted down for bullets and shell casings. Their true purpose never understood. We've been convinced that we're the crown of evolution, the pinnacle of development, masters of the planet. But what if we're merely degraded descendants? Or more troubling still, a replacement species on the ruins of gods? From childhood, we're taught to take pride in the achievements of the last 2 centuries. We're shown glossy pictures of steam locomotives, the first airplanes, Edison's light bulbs. Look, they tell us, what progress, what a triumph of human ingenuity. But all these breakthroughs are perhaps only pale shadows of what people possessed before the catastrophe. We didn't invent the wheel, we dug it up. We didn't build the pyramids, we merely patched them. We didn't discover electricity, we relearned how to use it by studying leftover samples. We've been stripped of knowledge, left only with fragments. We try to assemble a puzzle without realizing these are pieces of a shattered mirror. We see only a distorted, truncated reflection of former greatness. And we're told this reflection is the complete picture. We're instilled with an inferiority complex. We're taught that we cannot change anything, that great deeds belong to the chosen few, that ordinary people can only obey and consume. We're afraid to ask questions, to doubt, to seek answers. It's easier to believe comfortable lies than to face uncomfortable truths. This is learned helplessness, the main result of a centuries-long operation to replace history. Perhaps we stand on the threshold of another reset. Too many signs suggest that current civilization has exhausted its resources. Pandemics, climate anomalies, threats of global conflict, mounting chaos. A scenario already played out 200 years ago may be repeating. But this time we have an advantage. We know their methods. We recognize the tricks. We understand that a bayonet charge against machine guns isn't heroism, it's slaughter. We no longer want to be cannon fodder in someone else's game. What should we do? Don't take official doctrines on faith. Study, compare, analyze. Look for artifacts in your own cities, They're everywhere if you know where to look. Notice the buried first floors of old buildings. Read between the lines of old books published before history was rewritten. Preserve knowledge and pass it to your children and grandchildren. They stole our past to rob us of our future. But as long as we remember, as long as we question, we're alive. In our veins flows the blood of builders of star fortresses, not serfs and peasants. We're heirs to a great civilization whose ruins we call home. This story about rifles and bayonets is just one small episode in humanity's grand drama. But by pulling this thread, we can unravel the entire ball of lies. The world isn't what textbooks paint it to be. It's more complex, more frightening, but also more magnificent. There are secrets waiting to be solved. There's knowledge waiting to be discovered. There's truth waiting for its hour. Wake up. The time has come. Study the past so you don't become a victim of the future. The truth is always out there. You just have to open your eyes.